Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 4. In this week's episode, AJ and I talk about the importance of assessing your church's health before beginning a revitalization process. In order to move forward in a healthy way, you have to understand where you are right now, the good, the bad, and the ugly. AJ and I share 2 key principles and 2 practical tips that the Malphurs Group has learned from over 20 years of assessing churches. To read today's show notes, visit malphursgroup.com/4. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends in ministry. Now, let's dive in.
Okay, thanks for tuning in again today for the Church Revitalization Podcast. Today, Scott and I are talking about how to assess your church's health. It's another really important foundational part of any church revitalization process is to know where you're starting from. So that's what we're going to break down today and the components of that.
Yeah, so assessment's important. Some people feel like a church health assessment's not necessary. Let's just get straight into action. But you really can't know what to do if you don't have a good and accurate diagnosis of what your baseline is. When we work with a church, we always do what we call a church ministry analysis at the very beginning. And so an assessment is not a step we think that you should skip. So, all right, we wanted to give you 3 principles. If you're going to go about this on your own, there's some principles that we've learned over 20 years of doing these assessments with churches, and we want to share these principles with you. So let's go ahead and dive into those principles. 2 principles and then a couple of just practical tips.
First of all, we're talking about avoiding the iceberg effect. So you can picture in your mind the cool North Atlantic waters. The large chunk of ice floating in it. If you've spent any time in a science class, you probably know that the ice you see above the water is not the biggest part of the iceberg. The primary mass of it is under the waterline, out of sight, and well documented by anyone involved with the Titanic. So we want to know what's going on under the waterline. That was rather dramatic, wasn't it?
Man, that was a really long way of saying we're interested in the 90% of the iceberg that's underneath the waterline, not the 10% that it doesn't take a genius to notice. Like,
that's right.
Your attendance being down, okay, anyone can see that if you're in close enough proximity. Like, I can know that. I can know that your engagement in Sunday school is down, that your finances aren't, maybe you're not making budget. Like, again, I could probably guess that by just a Google search, right? Like I could probably look at pictures of your church on Facebook and make some educated guesses about those above the waterline factors at your church. Again, you don't need a professional church consultant to tell you when some of those above the waterline issues are not good.
Yeah. As a side note, I'm shocked at how many churches don't even maintain attendance numbers, though.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
There are some of you out there that don't even have above the waterline data points to lead you to look below the surface.
That's a good point. So
if you're not even doing some of this really basic stuff like tracking attendance, and hopefully you're doing something with finance, please start doing that. It's not going to turn you into a church that idolizes attendance.
No.
It's just a data point. That's one of those red flag indicators that you can go, okay, wait a minute here. We're seeing an iceberg out ahead. Let's figure out, why are we on course to hit it at this point? Man,
that's a great way of saying it. Like, seeing the 10% of the iceberg above the waterline tells you that there's 90% of it beneath the waterline. So it's not the problem. Your declining attendance is not the problem. It's a symptom of a deeper problem.
Yeah.
And so avoid the iceberg effect of only seeing the 10% and ignoring the 90%. We want to see the trends. So some ways to do that is basically to start with what you see above the waterline and ask deeper questions. So chart out your attendance. Like, you might be a church. Let's assume you do take attendance. Again, I am also shocked at the number of churches that we've worked with, by the way, that don't take attendance, and it's a lot of them. But chart out your attendance over the last 5 to 10 years and see what has happened. Like, do you see a steady decline, or do you see sharp jumps up and sharp jumps down? And because those they paint two very different pictures. So map that out with the church's story. So if you see these big jumps up or big jumps down, like what happened in those seasons? Did you lose a pastor? Yeah. Was there a moral failing? Did you hire a pastor? Did you get what happened? And it can kind of paint a picture. More often than not, though, we'll see a couple of jumps up or down, but mostly just a steady issue. And usually when we see that, it points to there are systems that are failing within the church. But which systems? Which systems are failing? You got to look for those trends. You can do the same exercise for finances. Counterintuitively, lots of times declining churches have not bad finances. Like the attendance might be going in the tank, but the finances might actually be going up or staying the same.
Yeah.
And there's some different reasons for that. Basically, people are doubling down on the status quo and saying, I love that we're not changing. And like they want to make sure that stays the same. And also counterintuitively, if you go through a revitalization process, you might actually lose money initially because some of those people might have deep pockets and they were like, no, I was really into us not changing. And those are the people who leave, and then you lose some money initially, but it builds back up as you begin to grow. But at any rate, like, dive deeper into the numbers. So one of the things that we'll look at, here's a consultant hack for you. Don't just look at the overall dollar amount that people are giving. Watch how they're giving it. Like, are they giving it towards designated giving, or are they giving it towards the general fund? Oftentimes in declining churches, there's a huge or beginning to be a shift, people giving more and more to designated giving and less to general fund giving.
Definitely have seen that. Yes. Yeah. And it could be, sometimes it's missions, could be a building fund or any kind of pet project. If you have too many designations, that's probably a side topic that should be looked at as well. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you got to take that to heart as the pastor, because read between the lines on that. They don't trust where this church is going ultimately. They want to control where the money is going.
Right. And
you need to take that to heart and go, People might be giving, but they don't trust us with the money, and they don't believe in where this ship is headed. When we do this in the church ministry analysis, we'll look at attendance and finances and strengths and weaknesses. And again, not just the things above the waterline, but the stuff that's really deep down underneath, and the trends. That's what we're interested in. We're looking for a diagnosis of why the symptoms are what they are, not just to treat the symptoms.
Number 2, the ostrich effect. So we all know the cartoon example of the
ostriches do this in real life, by the way?
Is that one of those things where there has to be some truth behind a stereotype? I don't know.
Someone who's listening, please Google this and send it to us.
Where do they get the hole in the ground that they put their head into? Do they make the hole? Is it a gopher hole? I don't know.
We're getting off track. But
we've all seemingly been taught that ostriches put their heads in holes. And then we're also taught that they do that so that they ignore the outside world and think they're safe because of it.
Here's a real thing that really does happen. Kids put their fingers in their ears when they don't want to hear or see something, and they'll close their eyes and say, la, 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 I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Like maybe when their parent is asking them to brush their teeth, right? Like it is the same concept of just burying your head in the sand, plugging up your ears and saying, I don't want to hear it.
We'll change this to the toddler effect.
The toddler effect.
Avoid the toddler effect.
Yeah. Most churches aren't honest brokers. Like that's just a fact. They're not. They don't see themselves for what they really are, and for what's working and what's not working. I guess I have a really concrete example of this. I think that sounds really mean to say churches aren't honest brokers, but I'm just like, I'm not serving you if I'm not being honest with you. So here's something that I hear a lot, and which is declining churches, especially like conservative evangelical churches, Baptist churches, will say, man, we just love the Bible. We're really good. Yeah, we might not be flashy. We might not be reaching our community with the gospel, but man, we love the Bible. Like we might be tanking, but we love the Bible. I go, okay, that's great. Like, that's awesome. That's amazing. So I was working with this one church, and they gave me the same song and dance. Like, we love the Bible. Like, we are faithful to teaching the word. And I was like, that's awesome. That's so good. And I want to be clear on that. Like, I do think that that's good. I visited their church though, and went to one of their Sunday school classes, and it was not good. Like, it was really not good. I am seminary trained, so I would know bad theology when I see it, but you don't even have to go to seminary. And I don't want to give the specific example, but I'll just let you know, it was just patently false. It wasn't true. The thing that the Sunday school teacher was saying was just not true. And I looked around the room thinking people were going to like riot and say, wait a minute, or at least push back and say, I don't think that that's what's happening in this passage. But everyone was just nodding and going, yeah, yeah. And I was astounded by that. And so I went to the elders of the church and said, hey, so I told them what happened. And they were like, oh, that person said this? I can't believe that. That doesn't sound right. I said, well, what's the approval process for selecting Sunday school teachers? And their answer was, well, we don't have a process because most people have just been teaching for years. This particular person had been teaching a Sunday school class, I think, for like 20 years. And so they just assumed that his longevity in that position meant that he was good. And then I asked, well, what's the oversight process for approving content in the curriculum so you can know that what they're teaching is good? And they said, we don't have one. And so the reality of the situation was they thought that they loved the Bible and that they're faithful in teaching the Bible well. And in some pockets, that was true. But in other pockets, it wasn't true, and it was inconsistent. And so they didn't want to hear that the guy who's been teaching Sunday school for 20 years was teaching something that was just patently false and wrong. But that was the reality. And so you've got to avoid that. If you want to be healthy, you have to get aggressive about figuring out the truth about who you are.
Well, another probably even more common example that we see frequently, Scott, is in first impressions. A church is all
friendly.
Everybody thinks they're friendly and welcoming. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, but you're not. You're not all friendly and welcoming.
Yeah, you're boring and irrelevant.
And you're ignoring people. I worked with a church not long ago that right from the start, they said, oh yes, we're friendly and welcoming, the whole thing. And my first Sunday there, as before anybody really got to know me, I walked in and was only after an uncomfortably long period of time handed a bulletin with no words. And then nobody greeted me prior to the service starting. One person after the service said hi to me. And when I went back and reported that to them, it was shocking that they were not friendly and welcoming. And so there's finger pointing on, who was working that day, or, who's responsible. Why did that happen?
But there's obviously not a culture of hospitality there. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter who was working.
Yeah. So this comes back to doing an honest assessment. So first impressions evaluation, is definitely important. Should be part of your assessment process. And it could be then that it identifies something that you think is all good, but it's not.
It's not. You have to be aggressive about finding out the truth, because you can't fix something you don't think is a problem. Okay, so those are the two main principles we want you to remember. One, that you got to avoid that iceberg effect where you go, because what tends to happen is that churches just treat the symptoms. We have declining attendance. Well, if we have an outreach event, we can counteract that. Well, maybe that works for like a week or two, but that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. Or we need better marketing. Yeah. So our attendance will go up if we have better marketing.
Yeah. And that's certainly true, but if you market your church and then you show up and people are unfriendly, they're not going to come back. So you've got, you got to treat the disease and not the symptoms. And then the second principle is the ostrich effect. Be an honest broker with yourself about what's really going on, and be relentless and aggressive about figuring out what's actually happening. So a couple of tips. Most church health assessments, including the one that we use at TMG, has some sort of a survey that's involved. So there's not always. I can think of a couple of assessments that don't use surveys, but typically there's a survey involved. So here's some mistakes that churches make when they run a survey. The most common mistake is that they survey the whole church. So this is a little bit counterintuitive because you'd think, well, I want to be an honest broker. Like I want to hear it from everybody. And you'd think that hearing everyone's opinion will actually give you a clearer picture. Again, this might be counterintuitive, but it doesn't. The best example we can give of this is that like when Gallup or any of these polling organizations run a poll or a survey, they don't just indiscriminately survey everybody. They're very picky about the data group that they get because they want accurate data, not just data in general. So we actually, if you'll go back to episode 2, where we talk about building a strategic leadership team or revitalization team, and the resource that we link to there, but we'll just link in this one too. Like there's a strategic leadership team selection grid. You can use that same criteria to select a data group. Yeah. But instead of picking 12 to 15 people, you maybe get 35 or 40 people, just depending on the size of your church. So the reason why you do this is there's like 2 extremes, AJ. The first extreme is people who have an axe to grind. Like, why should we not give them access to a survey?
Well, it's just one more platform for them to express their negative perception of things. So you've heard from them. You know who those people are, and you've definitely already heard from them. Having their same sentiment recorded in another point of view survey isn't going to, drive the point home any greater than it already has.
No, in fact, it will disqualify, in some sense, the survey. Because it'll be the loudest voice, and whatever, like if you're scoring certain things 1 to 5 and they're scoring all 1s, right, they're skewing that data down unnecessarily because they're just negative. And likely that's the only voice you're going to hear because it's just negative and it's the loudest. Likewise, people who are either really positive, like they just think everything is great, or they're uninformed, those folks are likely to not help either, because they'll either overrate things as good when they're not actually good, or they'll just pick a number that's not accurate because they don't know. So they'll just be like, pick 3 on everything.
Yeah. Now, a lot of times we will only survey our strategic leadership team, though, or revitalization team. But again, if you're doing that as a part of a revitalization process and you're sort of following the principles that we outline here at TMG, that becomes a really good cross-section of your church. They're no leaders. They're involved in ministry. So they are a group that will give you good data points.
Yep. Really good. Okay. Second mistake, AJ, that people make.
Surveys not being anonymous. So we definitely want to give everybody every opportunity to express themselves freely without holding anything back because they're afraid of their opinion being known by leadership. So always have your survey be anonymous.
One, people aren't going to be as honest if they know that their name is attached to it. They don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. And it's as much for you too, because your opinion of people will change if you know what they said. Like you might say, oh no, it's fine. I don't care. People can say what they want. I want people to say what they want. But it's just human nature. Like you're going to immediately categorize, this person is for me, this person is against me, and just remove that temptation, keep it anonymous, right?
So having comments available, though, we would definitely suggest that you make that an option so that people can, because sometimes the way, and we all know this, surveys can be skewed simply by the way a question is worded. But we want people to be able to express themselves, or if there's a nuance to their answer, they say, yeah, I made a 4, but there's this or that.
Yeah, or how a question is understood. I mean, the wording might be fine, but people can interpret that their own way.
So have open-ended an opportunity for them to express themselves, in a comment box of some sort.
Yeah, and if you have like a third party like us or whoever you use, like we don't know who people are. So when it's anonymous, it really is anonymous because we don't know. So when we read a comment, typically when we're putting a report together, I won't just give full direct quotes in the survey report because I don't want people to go, oh, I know who said that. So I'll extrapolate from all of the comments the common theme or trend, because generally I can spot something. And AJ, I'm sure you're the same way. Like I can spot a naysayer a mile away. Like when someone's just being negative, I can see that. Like we're not dumb. We've seen this enough times to know when someone's just being negative to be negative. versus when someone is saying something honestly and that really is a problem. And we need to bring that to the attention of the leadership. So
Right.
It just helps to have someone who's totally objective, looking at the data, looking at the comments and going, okay, I can spot this. I know what's happening.
We can usually spot the people that know what the right answer should be and are trying to do that as well.
Yeah. We can spot that other extreme too. So let's recap here. Number one, we have got these 2 principles and then 2 tips. Principle number 1 is you got to avoid that iceberg effect. Just don't just look at what's above the waterline, those data points, but figure out why those things are what they are. What are the trends? And 2, you've really got to just be honest with yourself, and don't be the cartoonish ostrich with your head buried in the sand, or the kid plugging their ears and saying la la la. Like, find the truth about what's really going on. And then in terms of tips, don't survey the whole church. That's a mistake. And be sure you keep it anonymous. That's for you and for them. That serves everyone better. And if you can add that other degree of anonymity by having a third party review the results, that's even better, because it really is at that point totally objective. So if you follow these principles when you assess your church's health, you're going to be well on your way to seeing your church for what it is. You'll be able to treat the roots and not the symptoms. Don't let it get you down either. This is a healthy thing to do. You're doing it because you feel like your church could improve its health already. Don't be surprised by results that come back that are maybe supporting that thought that we have work to do. But don't let that get you down. Nope.
I mean, we want the Lord to search our hearts, right? To know us and to build us up. And this is what we're doing. We're searching the hearts of our church, and only for the purpose of building it up. So don't let it get you down, and just let it instead be the thing that you can say, here's where we are, but there is a better tomorrow. And that's what we're working towards.
Yeah, and your revitalization process, I promise, I guarantee it will be undoubtedly more successful if you do an assessment, because it's rooted in reality. Your process is then rooted in reality and not what you think your church is. So once again, listen, if you found this episode helpful and you think it might help someone else, here's how you can serve folks. I mean, certainly share it. Like, you can share a podcast if you know specific people that you think this might be helpful for. But if you think it might be helpful for pastors in general, then a way to get this to them is to subscribe and to put a rating on it. That gets this content in front of more people and serves more pastors. And we really appreciate your help in getting this out to folks. We love you so much. Love making this podcast for you. And I can't wait to speak with you next week. Have a great day.